everyone. All right, so let's just give it a minute because. All right, hey Kristine, thanks for joining. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. How are you this Sunday afternoon?
Yeah, I got my second jab yesterday, so a little bit slow. Yeah. All right, so what happened to you that you become product manager? What went wrong?
Oh, that's a good question. Product manager is always like a very, very lonely job. Maybe because I like my own space, so end up being here. Who knows?
Yeah, what happened? I mean, why did you decide to become a product manager? Like, what was so special about building a product that you choose to be this person?
Yeah. So I share a little bit. Actually, I didn't choose it in the first place. As you may know, product manager has becoming a profession not that long ago, right? Unlike many others. So the same story, I started not as a product manager by all means as of now, right? I started my career in, strategy and also being, in marketing field, digital marketing. And I found product is on my way as one of a means to an end, right? So I was head of marketing for gaming companies, and I was in charge of a P&L for the firm, right, for Asia Pacific region. And back at that time, product is not clearly defined. So tech team, I work with tech team and becoming their go-to person in terms of what to build for the market and what games that should appeal to the target audience, right? And then that is when I stumbled upon product management and literally dive myself in. And ever since, that has always been an interesting journey because suddenly I came from originally as a strategist and a marketer, and then becoming one of the builders, right, among many, which is engineers, design, product as well, right, to make up of an idea or conceptualize of a thought or recognize the needs, and then help to bring it out to light, right, deliver it to the audience who needs it. And so far, it is very, very interesting and also very meaningful for personally.
Cool. So how do you manage a backlog? Like, are you the only one come up with the ideas, put in the backlog, or do you have a way of collecting what should be in the backlog?
Yeah, so I mean, let me step back a little bit, and I think that the word backlog is very popular among all of us who are very technical, oriented, right? So let me just clarify a bit. So just so in terms of context, so everyone join us could understand. Right. So what we call here as backlog is a list of different initiative or item or action item that the team, the builder team, needs to take care of over different sprint. Right. So in the concept wise, engineer, love the word backlogs. There are some others that calling it in a different form. Right. So for example, my product team sometimes use the word differentiate between the two, right? One is the must-do item, which is very, very much engineer-oriented, and the other list, which compile over time, is some people call business request, right? Or it can be list of customer needs or demands, or it also can be opportunity list, right? I personally love to use the word idea bank, and most of the time I form up somewhat a centralized library, and then to answer the questions of who would be the one who placing those ideas in, the answer is not only me, right? It comes from different sources. It comes from our customer support team who are directly interact with the user, right? The other source would also coming from directly our customers who are the user on the platform, right? They know their own pain points, so therefore they're probably one of the best valuable source of what is necessary or what would be important for you to build. And the few other sources can also counting in engineer, design, right, researcher as well, business operation as well, and not to mention, right, when from time to time when we're doing product strategy, and of course there's heavy dive in terms of market research, understanding the market trend, and also understanding competitors. There's also a lot of insight, right, which you can take and the team extracted. And we also include that as part of the idea bank that we have in-house.
Yeah, I love the name Idea Bank. That's quite interesting. Yeah. Then how do you groom that? Like, how do you prioritize it? How do you know which one do we implement? What is your approach on that?
I think that the approach might varies to different companies. The very simple reason is each company going through a different life cycle or stage of growth, right? So I'm not sure that everyone are familiar, but there's four stage of a company, which usually majority of companies go through, right? One is the introduction stage where lots of it are startup. They're trying to do the MVP, trying to go to market and test the market to see whether there's a market fit, right? The second stage, when a company has already found their initial product market fit, then they're starting to grow and or hyper grow in lots of company. So this stage is growth, the second phase, right? The third phase is maturity, right? When the company is starting to be a lot more mature, the product now is a lot richer, right? And then the company themselves can also choose to diversify their portfolio of product offering, right? And then the last one, which is decline. And lots of a company, of course, doesn't like to fall into the last part. Therefore, they keep reinventing themselves to stay more on the second or the third phase, which is growth or maturity phase, right? So in short, prioritization works and roadmap varies between different companies uh, due to the stage, right? If you zoom out and you can see very, very clearly that startup doesn't have lots of time, but has a lot of work to do, right? Then there's all difficulties of having a much restricted in terms of resourcing. Resourcing, I refer here as time and also number of people and or talents that are in the team, right? And then also given the time or competitive landscape, right? How much competitor that they have in the same space. So therefore, that greatly affect or shape up the prioritizations and roadmap, right? In this kind of company, usually it requires speed. Therefore, it's very important to prioritize items that easily identified as quick wins, right, over competitors, or the items that are helping to define their mission or their strategy moving forward, right? So now when we come to a different kind of companies that already in the growth or hyper growth stage, then we're also talking about a very, very different kind of resourcing, both in terms of funding, which is from different investors or can be bootstrapped, right, by himself. They already managed to grow the team to a certain size, right? And the pressure out of fast delivering is somewhat less because they have proven successfully at the early stage their product market fit, right? Then now the question is, okay, from the 0 to 1, which is done already, now how do we go from 1 to 10 or 1 to 100, right? At this stage, of course, depending on the ambitions of the company of whether they want to be at the growth stage or hyper growth stage, also greatly depends on which space, right? Is it a B2B company? Is it a B2C company, right? Or even nowadays, we also have D2C, right? Direct to consumer, right? Which kind of stage or condition that the company is in. Therefore, it's also influenced how this company prioritization, right? And maturity, of course, maturity is plenty of resourcing, we assume, and also the pressure of time is much less depending on whether the vertical of the product is on the spotlight or not, right? So in mature company already, we assume that the bread and butter is already kind of business already defined, right? There are at least one to a few, right? Key business running. Therefore, the stream of revenue or GMV should be more stable, right? And given these conditions, then the prioritization again is different with the spotlight vertical, which is the main business of the company versus others, which can be also a new venture, right? Yeah, so I think that Chris, you also been through many companies, right? So I'm pretty sure you can share also some of your perspective. Not sure if you would agree with what I just shared for that.
Interesting. The way you think about it is quite interesting. So before I share my view, I have another question on top of that, right? So, so we are familiar with this S-curve concept, right? Like, we say, hey, like what you're just saying, there are times that companies or products is basically in the last stage of going down, and then we need to find a way to bring it up, right? The S-curve concept. So when do you know, or what are the symptoms, or what are the signals that you would say, oh, you know what, our product is going down, and now it's the time to do something to bring it back to the next step, or bring it up, or create a curve for it again?
Good questions. I think that I have worked with few companies having this problem, right, in an advisor role. And to be honest, it's not an easy stage to be in, right? Because now you're facing a very big questions mark of how to define, what would be the next big thing, right? So one thing first, like as a company in that stage, I think that there's somewhat indications that the business, the business size especially, would starting to see in terms of, stagnant, right? In terms of either the new business coming in as not as rich as before, or it can also be the money of us as a company spending on marketing does show that there's something to it, that the value that coming back from those marketing dollars are not as sufficient as before, right? So I think that would need the company to kind of take a step back and being or exercise a very honest kind of practice, similar to how we do in retro, right? What has happened, where we are, identifying clearly where we are, right? And also have the courage to also face with difficult facts that, those exercise kind of may surface, right? I think that in perspective, the benchmark needs to happen very frequently, not only to wait until like, hey, we acknowledge that there's somewhat an indication of a stagnant, somewhere in the company. It's better to do it frequently with the whole team. I always say, right, it's always best to understand having an authentic view of where we are as a company and benchmark ourselves against our competitors, even both direct and indirect competitor, right? Nowadays, I find that our worlds with the technology evolve so fast, everything seems to kind of integrate into each other. And eventually, what it means is that even though on the surface, some company might not be a direct competitor to you, but somewhat, if you go deeper and analyze, you find that the value, right, of the product that they offer for the customer somewhat would be an indirect compete with you, right? So those are the things that you as a company needs to watch for. And frequently, doing that exercise internally or also with external help, right? To have that third view and removing the bias as well.
Oh, cool. There are some the opinions out there that are saying that product manager should have P&L targets. What's your view on that? Do you think is that the right thing, or what's your take? What do you think about having P&L targets for product managers?
I think P&L ownership definitely a line that is applicable to product, right? In my own experience, some business is suitable for to let the product being a P&L, right? Example as gaming. So, for example, online gaming is purely driven by an online product, right? And then also the whole organization structure is a technology product driven company, right? So it makes sense in such a setup to have product as a P&L owner. However, there's also other product lines or the nature of business actually needs to require or needs to be a share ownership between a product and a business, for example, right? So if you see the world of example ride hailing, right? Ride hailing is the world that is a perfect example of how P&L would split between the two. And even though when we're saying that it's a split owner, but it's actually the better word to say for it would be a co-owner, right? It also means that product affecting how business perform and vice versa, right? So therefore, I think naturally to increase also the elaboration and responsibility of both of the team, which is both fast moving, right? I think the best way to moving forward and to kind of having the high commitment to the same goal is also to have that merit P&L kind of relationship, right? The third one, sometimes I think that still P&L owner doesn't really necessarily belong or touch the product at all. These apply to cases when there's heavy driven in terms of business ownership, right? So I can tell like some of the very heavy, traditional or heavy operational kind of business line. So before we can say that, for example, traditional banking, right? It would be a typical example of having a business owner who own the P&L for a certain product, and then is a top-down kind of structure, where else it's clearly predefined by the business team, right, of what to do, and then the product engineers and design work based on that, right, and then moving forward. But then now I think that lots of the lines has been blur out, right? Since we're seeing also the infusion of lots of digital banking, then I've seen also lots of digital banks has moved themselves towards a mixture of co-ownership. Some new bank or neo bank in our terms has also moved completely to product-led business format, right? Which is in this case is to the first one that we mentioned about, is purely product P&L owner.
Interesting. Which kind of company do you think is the right choice for product managers? Do you hear me, Kristine? Which kind of these three models that you mentioned helps
I
the
don't think
product
there's
manager?
ever be a wrong choice, right? We're talking about. Sorry, can you repeat the questions?
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Hello?
Yeah.
Okay. So my question is, so out of these three examples that you mentioned, or three models, which of these models, P&L ownership or co-owned or shared or marriage of P&L, helps the product manager to perform better in the organization?
I think it depends on the maturity of the product person itself, right? So I wouldn't recommend someone as, junior level or senior PM or even sometimes lead PM to jump into, immediately pacing themselves into owning the P&L because it's a complex task, right? It requires a lot more to it in order to own the P&L, right? Simply because the P&L it on its own is the construct of combinations of different things. So it's whether the technology perform well, right? Whether we have work, sufficiently using our technology to advertise or to market ourselves into with the audience, with the target audience, right? But there's also a dimensions of business understanding and also the perspective of market trends, right? So in order to place oneself in such a complex kind of role and do it well, I think that it has to reach to a certain maturity in terms of level of a product manager in their career. So I've seen lots of people that have done, for example, 10, 15, 20 years of product themselves and still struggle to kind of manage this part, right? Whereas I think that a much healthier kind of co-owned relationship together with the business counterpart is somewhat more sustainable in the long run, right? Because we also looking at a P&L that can be even better with the support of multi-dimension kind of inputs and deliveries, right? Both from the product side and also from the business side. It always come to, this is my personal view, it's always better to kind of do it with someone rather doing it alone, right? And for sure, 90% out of time, the outcome of that would be a lot better by lots of means. Yeah.
Cool. So when you pick an idea from your idea bank and we say, hey, this is the feature that we're going to spend a sprint or 2 sprints on building it, do you guys even measure, like, is our organization maturity there to, even if we build this feature, can organization operate on this feature? Do you guys work on that, or what's the approach on evaluating the organization maturity for that specific feature out of idea bank?
Uh, yeah, very good questions. I think that if I look at it structurally, right, I think there's few questions that we need to ask ourselves whenever we have a strategic bet, right, which is may take a little bit longer time to kind of come to a result and require more efforts to put in, right, both intellectually or even timely and effort-wise. I think that there's an element of whether the organization is ready for it, but there's also an element of whether your audience is ready for it, right? There's indications of time, which we already know by now, that people introduce new concept and the market is not ready for it at all, right? So I think that the organization readiness is somewhat can be an internal feel, right, for you to evaluate whether that concept is easy to digest and absorb, right? So before we doing any prioritizations or road mapping, there's also a company-wide public area or venue, right, where we get together all different perspectives of a company come together and having a workshop together in terms of discussing, brainstorming of what we should do next in a quarter or in half a year, right? So what we're expecting to get out of this kind of workshop or offsite event is that we believe that our people are mature enough to come across with their own ideas and their own weight in the matter, whatever that is, removing their bias as much as possible, right? And then come together, have a healthy debate of whether we as organizations or we as a team can pitch a certain idea or concept, right? Either internally, and usually should be internally first, but also come to a stage of where like, hey, we should have a smaller test, right? So that we can go directly to the target customers that this product meant to be, and then quickly gather the informations either on the prototype, for example, of how they use it, to identify whether the size of the market, right, is actually ready for it. Then it's also a way better argument, right, per se, when you have those kind of data point that you get from your internal team and also from your direct customer to weight in the prioritization itself.
That's my last question. So what is your approach on measuring the success of that feature after going live? Like, how would you guys come up with, like, how do we know is this feature will be successful or not? What is your approach on that?
Yeah, so this is very, very frequently needs to insert in each of the product spec. I think that in other organization, there's also a word PRD, which is a product requirement documentary, right? So in short, right, there would always be a sections where we need to identify what is success look like and how do you measure it, right? And also to add in, there's also should always be what would it be in terms of failing, right? The reason being is there's two sides of a coin that every product manager needs to care about, right? The success rate or success metric, let's talk about it, right? Success metric itself has to come from different sources. So as a company, you always have a hero metric, which is overlying across the board. Everyone has to kind of use those certain metrics as a North Star, per se, for your organizations in a certain period of time, right? Your North Star can be an NPS of whether the consumer are happy with your product or not. It can also be the total, the GMV, right? Or it can also be a TPV, per se, right? In other organization, it can also include, for example, the number or the percentage of growth in terms of new user, right? But then when you come down to a feature wise, right? So the hero metric usually is the top metric that you need to kind of gear up to, right? But most of the features itself has a sub element to it, which is what we call as relevant metric, specifically just for that metrics alone, right? Because the reason for it is because if you don't have that secondary tiers of metrics, it would be very, very hard to see if, for example, in an A/B testing scenario or setup, how do you measure if that small variant that you place in actually move the needle, right? So I would encourage all the PMs to be more granular in terms of measuring their own success, right? Then comes to why we should always include the failing measure as well, right? So the failing measure can also be in a A/B testing experiment, the yield differences performance between the one or two tests between the normal and the control group are not much different. It also can be identified as failing, right? Or it can also be that there's a negative effect that coming out of the futures, which we didn't anticipate from, right? Then those failing, if you insert and if you prepare for that when you're doing a product spec at the beginning, right? Before you starting to build anything, then you literally helping also yourself and the whole team to build a contingency plan, right? If things go south, what will be the next thing that you can act on to move forward, right? Not just like, hey, it doesn't come out as we think it would, and then everyone now kind of stuck in the situation that nobody knows what to do next, right? So yeah, usually I encourage like my product team to do that practice with lots of discipline, so that they don't put themselves in a bad scenario.
All right, cool. Thanks, Kristine. We are getting almost to the end. I want to ask a lot more questions, but I said that was my last question, so I will not ask anymore. So Yeah, I mean, if you want to recommend a course or a book to product owners or to product managers to read it, what would that book be or what that course would be?
I think that there's quite a few of the recommended courses for PM in different level. So I can give a comments, right, in terms of a few different suggested courses after we finish these sessions. The books that I really like is there's also quite a number of those, right? So I think that for example, lean product, right? Or building product is hard. Are those title that is actually, should be fundamental to product people, right? There's also a title which, I resonate greatly because as a PM, we have to remove ourselves and our opinions from the bias. It's which is the book Ego is Your Enemy, right? I think it's also a great book. And yeah, I can recommend a few more in the comment sections after we're done
That,
with the sessions.
yeah, that would be awesome. Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot again for getting online and spending time with me and folks that are gonna watch this. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming online for Sunday and enjoy the drinks. Well deserved.
Cheers. You too. Take care. Bye.